Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Happy Hours on October 9th. For those of you who are Canadian peeps, I hope you had a wonderful Canadian Thanksgiving, and I think everyone here is, but if you're not, you missed out on a chance for pie. So I hope everybody had a good one. So I have some things to talk about in terms of Nano, if that's all right with everyone. I'm curious, show of hands, how many of you plan to do Nano?
Sure.
A little, maybe not. So
I actually haven't thought about it. I usually do.
This is my preparation. So instead of winter is coming, I'm doing Nano is coming. So this is a good chance to sort of think ahead. So I wanted to just sort of talk through a little bit. So I think everybody who's on today knows what Nano is, but for those who might be listening in and may not know, Nano is National Novel Writing Month. I forget who actually started it, but the idea behind it was that you would write 50,000 words in 30 days. So if you're doing the math on that, that is 1,667 words a day, which is not too bad. The challenge is it's 1,667 words every day. That's the kicker that tends to get people. So first off, does that get you a novel? No, it does not. So with few exceptions, so depending if you're writing for kids, for example, in general, usually 50,000 words is not enough to count as an adult novel. But it does get you a good other way in. So it was really started with the idea for a lot of people who have the dreaded internal editor. And that's the idea that there is something inside of you that lets you get so many words in and then stops you and you get stuck and you perseverate on the same thing. So what I think Nano is best for is kicking people out of that frame of reference, as well as getting a lot of just words on the page in a short amount of time. How many people, show of hands, has anyone done Nano before? Anyone want to tell how it went for them?
I've been doing it since 2012.
Who's talking?
Oh, that's fine.
Marianne, I'm talking.
I thought I'm looking at all the, oh, yep, there, sorry. Looking at all the faces and looking for some moving lips.
Yeah. It's like our little Brady Bunch thing. So there we go. Bonnie's up in the corner.
I started in 2012 because I had so much fear about writing the actual first draft. I thought, what if it's crap? So I couldn't actually get started. So I thought, I'll take this challenge. I'll write 50,000 words. If I can write 50,000 words, then I can probably write a novel. So because I hadn't written anything more than, a school project of 1,500 words before. So that's why I started. And now I just do it because it's my month of writing and everybody in the family knows to leave me alone.
There's something to be said for that. Anyone else who's done it? What was your experience? Positive? Anyone not like it?
I like it.
Yeah. I've only heard a couple people who haven't. How about you, Marianne? What about it for you works?
Well, I just opened my dashboard to remind myself. I've done it 5 times, and I've been a winner 3 of those times. One of those times I actually sat down to turn an outline into a full feature screenplay. So I actually won, but a feature screenplay isn't as many words as a novel, so I didn't hit the 50,000 word target, but I did it. So for me, that's 4 wins out of 5. And the 5th time, I tried to finish a manuscript that I had started in Nano, and I don't know what happened.
I don't know what happened.
Well, I don't remember. I think I probably finished the manuscript, but it didn't hit the word count or something like that. That was last year. So all in all, it's been a very successful endeavor for me. And I do, as these morning sprints prove, I do respond well to external validation, sadly. And so being there and knowing that thousands of other people are in the chair, madly typing away, and strangely counting their words on that little bar chart. It works for me. I don't know if I'm just inherently competitive or I don't know what it is, but it really gets my act in gear, and I perform, and I sit down, and I got to hit those targets, and so I always get a lot done, and it's wonderful. The only downside is that after NaNo ends and all the hot air gets released from the balloon, I keep writing through the first part of December, but then the enthusiasm tapers off and all the panic of preparing for Christmas bumps it out of the way. And I invariably end up with 60% of a novel, which languishes until February or sometimes for years.
Well, and I'm going to take away the word languish, and I'm going to say ferments.
Okay, well, I have a lot of fermentation going on.
Some fermentation happening there.
Yeah.
So a few things that kind of stick out for me. So the few times that I've talked to people who haven't liked NaNo, it usually comes around one of two things. So one is they become really competitive, and then if they're not keeping up, feel like now I've lost, which is kind of one of those ironic things, because if you win NaNo, what you get is like a certificate suitable for framing that you have to print off yourself. Like they don't even print it off for you. It doesn't come with a fancy wax seal or a gold seal or anything on it. And let's be honest, if you lied, nobody would actually know. So you could say that you won NaNo. It's not like an Olympic thing where you're going to cross the finish line or any of those kinds of things. So I do think it's a good reminder to not get caught up in the idea of that you have to do some certain thing, and just remember that really what we're trying to accomplish, the biggest goal, is just to get more words down, and it's a way to sort of concentrate. And I think it puts a deadline down. So I often get asked when I do workshops, like, how do you write through writer's block? And the biggest answer to that is I have a deadline. So if I have an external deadline and I have someone who is waiting for me on something, I will get something done. When something is an internal deadline, I think too often, and I may get a little political here, too often in particular with women, I think we put ourselves secondary and we say, oh, I've got to do this thing for the kids, I've got to do this thing for my boss, I've got to do this thing for my spouse, and what we're trying to do for ourselves falls off. So I think NaNo is just a way of sort of artificially giving ourselves a deadline and some sort of external push.
Something very important I have to do. Go away and leave me alone.
Yes. So what are some things that might help? So some things to think about for NaNo, which is also not a bad idea if you're just on a deadline in general, whether that's self-imposed or artificially imposed, is first sit down with your calendar and clear the decks. So really take a look at what's on your schedule for the next 4 weeks in that month. Is there anything that can go? Can you outsource any of those things? So if you're the one who always picks up the kids after school, is there someone else who can do that? Or can you rotate? So a mom down the street's going to pick up on Mondays and you'll do Tuesdays and someone else is going to do Wednesdays. I don't think it means that you can't enjoy and do things if you want to plan a dinner with friends and those kinds of things. But I think it's the idea of thinking through, like, is this something that's worth adding to my schedule given this other priority? Which I think I told a lot of you that I read this book recently about the art of not giving a fuck. And it really has, kind of influenced my thinking over the past couple of weeks, because it really does talk about that idea of kind of pausing before you agree to something, which I am terrible at, and saying, like, is this something that I really need to be doing? Is this adding? So for NaNo, it's a great time to be like, are these things that need to be on my schedule? Could someone else be taking on these things? I think it was Bonnie who said, your family knows to leave you alone. Was that you? Yes. So this is also a good time to have a conversation with people in our life about the fact that writing is important to us, and that we are going to be spending the next month involved in a project and that we need their help. And I think that is really useful to talk about with your family, again, whether it's Nano or some other time, around that idea of, is this the best use of my time right now? Is my family respecting that time? And whether that's a sign you put on the door. So I know some people, especially people who have kids, have a sign that they put on the door, like, if you're not bleeding or something's not on fire, then you don't knock on the door until this particular time. Hopefully, if you have older kids or a spouse, they don't require a sign, but they might. Or they might require you to be out of the space. So it might be like, you know what, after dinner, I'm going to the coffee shop down the street, and that's where I will be for a couple of hours, because it's just too hard if I'm home to not get sucked into, oh, can you help me with this homework? Hey, honey, there's something great on Netflix. And then before I know it, the night got away from me. So clearing your own schedule, clearing your schedule with your family, all of that will help. Doing some smart things in terms of even stuff like meal prep. So again, we're a couple weeks out from Nano, so now is a great time to power cook through some stews or some lasagna and stick that sucker in the freezer. Go to your M&M meat shops. That's my favorite cheater dinner of all time, is they have so many things that you just pull out of the freezer and cook. Big fan of the stuffed chicken breast, if you want to try those out. All kinds of flavor options there. But having some things in your freezer or in your fridge that you know are your go-to. And again, maybe you don't have to be the one to cook dinner all the time. It's a crazy thought I had that you might want to give a shot. Maybe you don't need to be the one to do that. Other things that are helpful. How many of you like writing with an outline? Do we have any pantsters, or are we outliners in this room? One pantster?
I do both.
Planning.
What do you do for Nano?
I can pipe in here. Other than having at least a chapter, like at least my beats, minimum, but maybe even a rough chapter outline. I also do other kinds of prep, like character studies, setting research, and I scoop up a bunch of images of characters and settings and things, and I stuff it all in my Scrivener project. So I'm kind of steeped in stuff about the book, so that while I'm in Nano, I don't have to run off and figure anything out, because that's dangerous and distracting. And and then it also just kind of, you get immersed in it and you're ready to hit the road running on November 1st. So it's a combination of outlining and research. Yeah.
I think Nano in general runs sometimes a little bit smoother for people who are more comfortable with outlining, again, even if it is just those bullet point ideas versus pansters. Just because they kind of, it takes out the question of what do I write next. So they may not write it well, but they know what, at least in theory, is coming up next, which doesn't in any way mean that you can't do Nano as a pantster, because certainly tons of people do. But I think spending some amount of time in brainstorming and just asking yourself, what are some possible scenes that might come up, so that if you hit a day where you sit down and there is no genius showing up at the computer that particular morning, that you have some idea. And Marianne's idea is also great. Is there anything else that will help you out? Some character studies. If people haven't done the backstory masterclass that's in the Academy, it has some great prompts in the workbooks. Granted, I am a little biased because I wrote it. So I'm just like, it's some great prompts as it came out of my mouth. I thought about how bad that sounded. But I do think it is helpful at understanding where your characters come from. So if that is something that kind of helps you get those characters going, doing up some kind of either Pinterest board or something in Scrivener with setting details or atmospheric details. Like, think about, the room that your person lives in and they work in, what's their school like, What's their workplace like? What do they look like? All of that can sometimes just be, again, a jumping off point if you find yourself in that day when you are suddenly stuck. So that can help.
Can I just throw in one more suggestion? Recently, I tried out the free 1-month subscription to One Stop for Writers.
Yeah.
There's a coupon in the Academy, and I loved it so much I just put it on auto renew, because for $9 a month there's just so much great stuff in there and it's so easy to use. They also have,
can you say give an example or two of what you found useful in there?
Okay, let me just go to the I'm still learning how to get around, because I mostly use the thesaurus, just keep it handy while I'm working. But they have all the thesauri, so you can build characters and you can identify their strengths, their weaknesses, their wounds, and typical emotional responses or behaviors under stress for them. Because there's so many choices, right? When you look at the emotional thesaurus, you almost have to customize, like you have to choose, how does this character, which of these characteristics or behaviors suits them. And so you can kind of flesh out a character by sifting through, instead of having to look each time, you can, and then they have the tool in there to actually build out your character study. They also have plotting maps, tools for plotting the story. They have world building surveys, so you can just go in and follow all the prompts for whatever settings you're trying to create. They have idea generators. They have, I sound like I'm getting a commission, but I'm really kind of turned on by this website.
Well, I think it's that thing where what works for one person doesn't work for someone else. But this is a great example, I think, of the kind of resource that you might want to bookmark for Nano if Nano's coming up, where it's like, again, if you're going to find yourself stuck at any point, if there's a place you can go, or if you're old school, go to your library and check out all those craft books that you haven't bought, so that you have a tidy stack that are full of prompts and Kickstarters. Again, the trick to me is what is going to get those words on the page.
Hey, it's Lisa. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
we can.
Oh, awesome. I wanted to speak on behalf of all pantsers because I mean, I understand. I know that I've gone to these things, and when I hear someone say, "Oh, it's much easier to do NaNoWrimo if you're a plotter," I feel bad because I can't plot. I plot, but I wreck. I just ruin my story, and I get the worst writer's block if I plot. So I've done Nano 5 or 6 times now, successfully, most of them, or 6. Yeah, this would be my 7th, I think, maybe, or 6th or 7th. Anyway, I've done them for a while. And, but you see, I changed my scope. I don't sit there and go, I have a novel at the end of Nano, which is what you're talking about. I actually go, I got 50,000 words written.
Yes.
That's it. And yeah. I got 50,000 words written, and some of that might be character sketch, some of that might be a diary entry of the character, and it may be never make it into the final, but I'm learning about the character and my story as I go. So that I may only have 20,000 usable words, but most people usually feel that way after Nano, whether they plot or not.
That is very true. And yeah, to be clear, I want to make sure, I also clarify, I'm not saying that people have to outline, but I think having bullet points or something that you want to tackle. So kind of building on what you're saying, Lisa. So it might be I want to do a character sketch on Susan, and I want to do a character sketch on Peter, and having some ideas so that when you have those some days that just are horrible, you know where to go.
Oh, absolutely. I just also, I guess we all have our bias, you know what I mean? Our lens that we see things. And if a plotter will always see that plotting is the most logical way, absolutely. I'm just speaking as somebody who's tried plotting and failed so terribly. that
Well,
it
and I think
ruined my,
it's important to be clear, like plotting doesn't work for a lot of people. You're
yeah,
certainly, I don't think, the only one. I would say when I talk to people who are published, I'd say it's fairly evenly split between people who are pantsters and plotters. And to be honest, a large number of people fall somewhere in the middle. So they
yeah,
have some kind of plot to start with. They may have an outline, but it's very loosey-goosey, and then they're just kind of going with the wind once they get going. To true pantsters who, just sit down, who are literally like, I haven't any clue. Let's see what happens. Page 1, day 1. And everything kind of in between those two things. It's what works, and whatever works for you is the way you should do it. And if there's anything that I have learned, and believe me, there's a lot of stuff I haven't learned. But one of the things I have learned is that what works for someone else may be a great tip for you, and what works for someone else may totally stunt your writing. And you have to just kind of try different things and see what works. And I think you just discover it eventually. Like you find your own personal path, whatever that is. But I think, and I appreciate Lisa kind of chiming in with that idea, like, don't ever think like, oh, I'm not a plotter, so Nano's not for me. It's just, how are you going to tackle it? It's going to be different.
There's also no reason you can't spend November writing a series of short stories or working on several projects, it's nobody's business what words you write. So it's just kind of catching the wave, right? And
again, let's go back that Nano is just a personal milestone. No one, other than sort of checking in with other people, you're not going to get a gold star. There's no medal at the end of it. There's no mockery if you don't make it. It's just that opportunity to block aside the time and to sort of do it with a group of people, which we know is fun, which is kind of why we're all here even this morning. Like, that's the whole idea behind the Academy, is the idea of when there are many of us, there just gets that sort of extra oomph. So that's actually one of my other suggestions, is if you're not doing the writing sprints, that may be something to consider checking out, because those are a great way of kind of blocking off time with other people. And again, for those of you who are interested, there is psychology behind that. This is why things like Weight Watchers and AA, we think, have a higher success rate than sometimes people going on their own. And it's that idea of being accountable to someone else. Most of us have a scale at home. You don't have to go to the Weight Watchers office to weigh yourself. There is no magic thing that is happening there. It is the idea of having to go and check in with someone else makes us more accountable. So the writing sprints are a great way to do that. If they don't work for you, or the timing is not ideal for you, you certainly can do the exact same thing yourself, which is turn on your computer, say, I'm going to write between the hours of, you choose your hour, 5 a.m. to 6 a.m., because you're one of those weird people who likes to do that. So you're going to get up at 5 in the morning. Then a few things you need to do: turn off your internet, turn off your email notification, put your sign on the door that tells your family to leave you alone, pee before you sit down, and then sit down and just give yourself that hour. And again, I think the big push behind Nano, and what makes it successful, is it means turning off the internal editor. So you sort of accept that whatever you write isn't going to be perfect. And I sort of chuckled when Lisa talked about, she maybe ends up with 20,000 usable words, but that's probably the same as everyone else. And that's so very true. Agents live in fear of the month of December, because what happens in the month of December, unfortunately for them, is that many people who are writing or doing Nano sometimes for the first time are like, I have written a book, and they are so proud of it, and they are so in love with it. And they basically hit send and start sending that sucker off agents on December 1st. And in most cases, they're kind of a hot mess. That doesn't mean a book written in Nano can't become amazing. Certain books, I don't know if people read Cinder, which was a YA New York Times bestseller. That was a nano book. Water for Elephants, which was a huge phenom, was a nano book. There are certainly tons of examples of people who started a book in nano. But please, for all that is holy, don't assume that at the end of November that you have a workable book. In most cases, I'm going to say 99.999% of cases, you probably just have a really good start or a really good finish. Some of you talked about using Nano to finish up a project, or you have a group of short stories, or you did all the work that's going to help you when you actually are ready to kind of sit down and write that book. Some other things that sort of will help, and again, that's why I wanted to talk about it today when we're still a few weeks out, is I don't know what everyone else's office looks like right now. I'm looking around mine with sort of sheepishness. There's a reason I'm not going to show the camera around at this particular point, because behind me is very clean.
You see my wine boxes are gone.
Yeah, that's disappointing for me, Marianne. I think I need to bring wine boxes in. That's my goal. But to sit down and be like, we do know that our space can sort of help make a difference. So take a look at your writing space. Is this a good time to maybe clear some of the stuff off of there? If you're a big fan of a cork board and having kind of like inspiration, maybe that's a place where you want to pin up some pictures, or you want to go on Pinterest and find, you know, a great motivational quote about writing and have that up there. But kind of clearing your space, both physically, I think helps emotionally and in your own headspace to have that space ready to roll come November 1. Be prepared to write everywhere, which is another tip that I got from someone else. Whether that's, you know, you're taking your laptop places, or whether or not that you have your iPad or a pad of paper. It kills me. Crystal does a lot of writing on her phone, which is one of those things where I'm like, yeah, Leslie's face is pretty much my face, where I'm like,
doesn't she have that little keyboard that she plugs in?
Yeah, she has a little tiny keyboard that she plugs in.
She claims that because something about that version of Scrivener, you could only see one line of type. So
Yeah.
she's not distracted by all the words that she's already written. Or
I love how you said she claims, as if you're like, I don't really trust her on this at all.
I know it's only that my memory's faulty and I don't want to say anything.
No, but you are bang on right, which is sometimes writing on either an alternative device or something. Like, I know when I open up my laptop, I instantly see in the sidelines, because that's where I drag if I have any mentorship papers that need to be read, they're on my desktop so that I don't accidentally forget that I'm supposed to be reading them. When I get student pages in for SFU, they go onto my desktop. So when I open up my laptop, the first thing I see is all the other things I should be doing. I see the emails coming in. I see my GLIP thing at the very bottom, like, oh, there's stuff coming into, you know, GLIP. I should check and see what that is. And so sometimes doing something like your phone, where again, like as Crystal claims, you can only see a line or two, is a way to sort of clear that deck so you're not being distracted. I know I have another friend who, again, is a published author, and she does Nano. She doesn't really worry about the word count as much, but she does it handwritten. So she handwrites for an hour every day. Yeah. Yeah, she's younger than me, so she has no rheumatoid arthritis or any of those kinds of things. But she finds that it's just the most freeing way for her to do it. And again, she's often then taking it to coffee shops and all those kinds of things. I know people who are moms who get 15 to 20 minutes of writing done while they're waiting to pick up their kids for school. So they are in that school lineup and they just have 15 to 20 minutes. So they're going to get those pages in. And if that's a time and a place that you can do it, I think you'd be surprised at how much writing you can fit into small places. And I think sometimes when we're kind of shoehorning it into some place where there isn't a lot of time, we're even more free, because it's like, I've got, you know, so much time. And if we string those together, because I know I'm really bad about sometimes it's like, oh, well, I'm leaving to go to the dentist in 40 minutes. So there's really no point in opening this up. There's no point in starting. I've only got 20 minutes. And so I am the master at futtering away time in those tiny little increments. Like, I'll just tidy up the house for 10 minutes and that's all that will happen. Or more likely, I'll just scroll through what's happening on Facebook or Twitter for 15 or 20 minutes, and that time is then gone. So stringing those together can actually add up. And I know I was much better at this when I was working full time. Because I often had to squish writing in around the corners. I tried for a really long time to be that person who got up early and then wrote and then went to work. And what I discovered is I am not a person who gets up early and does much of anything useful. 6 a.m. is about the earliest that I can sort of get up. And even at 6 is not usually good writing time for me, but I can get other things done if I'm up and moving. So you kind of maybe have to know your own thing. But, you know, I wrote on my lunch breaks, or I would write sometimes, again, I was a counselor. So sometimes depending on when appointments were, I would have 10 or 15 minutes between clients. And it used to be time that I would just sort of dink around. But I, you know, when I was doing NaNo or when I was trying to get through something, I would be like, that's 10 minutes. I could probably sketch out what that next scene's going to look like. And then when I have more time, I'll write it a little bit faster. So give yourself that permission to kind of break those times up.
I've been playing around with the idea of using dictation, which is faster. Everybody claims. But there's a big sort of learning curve, especially if you're using Dragon.
Yeah.
Crystal says you actually have to take the time to train your Dragon, or you end up with something worse. So I don't know.
Bonnie could have told you that for years gone by. She should have.
But I still, you know, I'm intrigued. And sometimes I just use the voice record function on my phone in Notes or any other app, just to try and, I don't know, kind of access some other part of my brain. And
well, we do know, I mean, one of the reasons I talked about handwriting is we know that, because I'm a weird dork, like if you put someone in an MRI machine and you have them tell a story, it lights up one part of their brain. If they write a story, handwritten, it writes up different parts of the brain. If they're typing, it's again, some different parts. And there is some overlap with all of these, but it is using different parts, right? So I think opening ourselves up to those different ways of getting things down is really useful because I think sometimes it shakes something free, or we have a realization. I mean, one of my favorite things to do is to talk about stories with people. Not because they're necessarily going to solve my plot problem, but the process of talking it out makes me think about it in a different way. And sometimes they're saying things like, well, what if your character did this? And you're like, no, that's not right. And then they're like, well, why? Like, why can't they do that thing? And then it's like, yeah, why can't they? Like, and then it starts me thinking about, I'm having some, like, and so it opens up those different ideas. I think NaNo is also, and I say this as someone who's generally not a very experimental person, but is a chance to just sort of let yourself go and maybe try some stuff that you haven't done before. So if you're finding yourself stuck, suddenly switch and start writing it as a screenplay. And write 15 pages of screenplay and then maybe switch back over to a book. Again, you're not hoping to have 50,000 words and send it off November 1st. So if something works for you, if it's suddenly that you want to make it graphic, and so you're going to draw pictures and string those things together, like that's what's working, then that's what you want to do. Just in terms of thinking about word count. So it's 1,667 words per day. So if you want to split that up, that's a mere basically, you know, kind of 850 words in the morning and another 850 in the evening. So that doesn't seem so bad when you kind of break it down that way. But I think what definitely works the best for most people is to have some awareness. And I do this all the time to this day, is I sit down each week and I kind of make a list of like what's happening each day. And so sort of acknowledging it may be a case of, you know what, I'm not going to get much written on Wednesday because I'm working all day, and then the kids have a soccer game that evening, and then we have people coming over for dinner. So if I get 100 words in on Wednesday, it's going to be a rock star day. But that means those other 1,500 some words have to get squished in someplace else. So kind of taking a look and seeing where that is. And when I'm in the middle of a project, I do a running word count for myself. So I have sort of sat down and been like, if I want to have 80,000 words by January 1st, I've kind of backed that out so I can kind of constantly see if I'm on target or not. And you can do the same with Nano and sort of be like, if you know it's 1667 words per day, you can figure out what that is per week. I could do that for you right now if I had my math thing calendar out. So times 7, it's 11,669 words per week. So you can write that down in your calendar, and then you can sort of look and sort of see at the end of week 1, like, where are you? Are you ahead of schedule, behind schedule? And there's always going to be that irritating person who pops up on some Nano board who, like, on November 4th is like, I'm done. Like, you ever see those people? I'm like, I hate you. But there's always a few of those people, but that's fine too. Good for them. I'm happy, sort of, for them. So what can you accomplish in that? But having some way of keeping track of that word count is just sort of a good habit to get into. And that, I think, really is what I'm trying to sort of put forward, that really is the goal for Nano, which is to take the month of November. It's before the holidays, before things get too crazy. Hopefully school has started, so it's not too crazy that way. And say, this is 1 month that I'm going to spend where my writing is in my top 3 of my priorities. So I will let you have a couple others, maybe a family member, something like that. But everything else, this is the thing that's going to take precedence. And it may get pushed back off. You may find that come December, things get crazy busy again. But I think it's a really good habit to give ourselves that for this month, this thing that I hold sacred, I'm going to give time to, and I'm going to spend the time on it and make some headway. And then I think what you find is, hopefully, if it goes well, you kind of knock through a few things and you have a great start on something, whether or not you hit the 50,000 words or not. Like, that's really not the important part of it. Any thoughts or questions on Nano, or actually absolutely anything else? Dead silence.
I just find that because we're writers, and obviously we'll probably have writers watching this, I use Nano as a break. So I just give myself permission to write whatever. So if I'm on a project and maybe I'm stuck, I'll use Nano to brainstorm backstory and just generally write anything, come up with a scene that I didn't even know that I would need further along. And other times I just use it to write that new shiny idea that keeps trying to distract me. And I say, for the month of November, I'll write about that shiny idea, and then I will put it away, and I will get back to work on my project. So it's also a time to just, I don't know, set yourself free.
Yeah. I would like to add that as an indie published author, I walk around with a very grumpy, bossy business manager on my shoulder all the time, who hounds me and makes me feel guilty for the frivolous writing work because there's so many other things that need my attention. Everything from the publishing side of things to the list building to, the platform to connecting with readers. And it's just like this barrage of tasks that can suck every minute of your day. And it's a completely other part of my brain and kind of energy than I use for writing. So I always have this war going on. And the nice thing about NaNo is that if you're giving the writing the priority, you can take that guy and shove him out and close the door and say, take the month off. This month is for writing, just writing, and everything else can wait.
And I find it fascinating that, because I do the exact same thing. And I know so many writers who do that, right? Like that we need that external permission, that we need a website and a logo telling us that this is an okay month to do that thing. Like, I find that fascinating that we do that versus at any time sort of saying, okay, bossy internal manager, because I have one too. You're not alone in that. Perhaps ours hang out at the country club together. I don't know, but
mine's kind of a Sam Spade, guy. He's in his seedy bar drinking. No country clubs.
Oh, mine's like one of those 1980s overly shoulder pad women with like a bra that's too tight. And so she's got a lot of issues. Her underwire is poking her constantly, is my theory. That we don't just do that for ourselves, that we don't say, I'm going to take a week every month where writing is my priority. And I will sit down every month and I will pick what week that's going to be. And that week, that is my number one priority. And another week, I'm going to make whatever else it is. The list building or the business is going to be my number one priority. That, like, for some reason, we don't give ourselves that permission. But somebody comes up with NaNo and they have a great logo and a website. And we're like, oh, okay, I can do that. Like, that's all right. But that we need that from someone else. So I think of NaNo being, and I've never been a NaNo purist. I've never like kept track or so, like, other than for me, when it rolls around, it becomes for me that reminder of, oh, right, this is what I say is important to me. And I need to honor that thing that is important to me. And it becomes in the same way that spring cleaning, I have certain triggers. So New Year's, September is another big one for me, like something about fresh office supplies and the smell of freshly sharpened pencils just jazzes me up. And I find, like, come September, I'm the person who's cleaning the house. I want everything sort of tidied and put away and those kinds of things. That NaNo is another kind of one of those external reminders to sort of clear the decks. Like, what's important to me? What am I going to spend my time on? It's a creative spring cleaning. And that's kind of what I sometimes need. So I think using NaNo, whether that's getting words on a document that you've been trying to finish, or whether that's, I love Bonnie's idea of sometimes just giving yourself permission, like, you know what, I'm not going to worry about whatever else I was going to do or worried about. Like, I'm just going to have fun for the month and I'm going to write something wonderful. In the SFU program that I teach for, one of the units that they do is called a cross-genre module. So when you sign up for the SFU Writer Studio, you pick a module that your mentorship group is in. So I was in YA Speculative is the group that I do. And I had one person in my group, and she had been working very diligently on a YA fantasy story. And in the cross-genre group, they have to spend 1 month with another group. And so she went over to another group, and so she had to write something completely different. And so she ended up writing a middle grade. And then she brought the middle grade pages back, and they just sung. Like, they were just so, I don't know how else to describe them other than sparkly. And it was this realization for her, like, she had been so, and I absolutely loved her YA idea as well, but there was something about the middle grade that just really took off. And that's ended up being what she spent the rest of the Writer Studio program on, was this idea that came up. So I think you never know what's going to happen during NaNo. And I think if you don't get caught, and again, kind of hearkening back to the very beginning when I talked about, I think the people who have disliked NaNo are people who go in with a set idea of, this is what it's going to be. At the end of this month, I'm going to have 50,000 words in this particular manuscript, and it's going to be an adult thriller, and it's going to be this, and it's going to be the next Gone Girl. And then they're trying to force something that maybe isn't happening, when all of a sudden, really their brain wanted to go off on a middle grade fairy story, and they should have just let themselves go there. I loved, Lisa's idea, like, the idea is writing. So if those are not manuscript pages, but they're character studies or there's something else. I don't believe any of that ever gets wasted. Stick it someplace, even if, again, at the end of the month, you're like, well, that was great. And now on to something else, back to my regular scheduled project. It's a great way to kind of get that in. All right. Anyone want to chime in on things or any challenges they're having with their own projects or get any advice?
I have a question.
Yes, Leslie.
I just watched our Lisa Cron presentation. I was talking to Bonnie about this, and I have a lot of manuscripts all lined up, ready to go, and I just working on the one that's calling the loudest. But when I went through that 6 hours, I feel like I can't, and this happened to me with my second novel, that I got to the end of it many drafts later and went, I don't know what my character wants. And I finally figured it out last year at Surrey, and I rewrote the whole thing, and it's fabulous. And so I'm working my way. I got 15,000 in this one, 35,000 in this one, blah, blah, blah. And I'm on the 35,000 word right now. And I'm like, I don't know what my character wants, like the main overarching character. And I'm like, Bonnie says sometimes she doesn't know until she finishes the end of the book what the character wants. But is there an easier way to figure it out before you start, and so you don't have to go through all that all over again? Like, I know where the story's going, and I know that, but that driving question, what are they looking for? What is the purpose of the story?
Leslie, years ago I took an online class with a writing coach named give me a sec. Lori Schnebley Campbell. I think that's right. And she has her own website where you can sign up for her courses, and she does this all independently. And there's a course called The Hero's Personality Ladder or something like that. And she has this way of asking you questions. It's all structured. And if you do the course, then you walk through the whole thing and you get feedback as you go. But then you have the tool and you can use it again and again. And I've used it repeatedly to get sort of to the bottom of that, because she has a way of digging so that you can start out with a kind of a loose idea of your character and maybe even what their superficial goal is. But then she'll dig down and down and down and down until it kind of reveals what their core motivation is. And then, but in the process, you learn what the connection is between what they really need and what they do about it, and how that sort of leads to the way they're behaving and their identity at the beginning of the story. But it's just, I found it really, really, really useful.
What was her name again?
Her is Lori, it's Campbell Schnebley Campbell.
Nebley?
Anyway, Schnebley is pretty unique. It's Schebley. If you put that in, you'll probably find it.
Schnebley.
Nebley.
That's pretty different, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I will. I mean,
I don't know why I keep going back to it. And I've done so many, I've read books and done courses and workshops, and I keep going back and using that tool. And when I go back to a project that's just a pile of notes, like a future project, and if I've gone through that exercise for one or two main characters and read through the whole steps, it just comes alive to me, and I like, oh yeah, I remember why that book was so important and what that character is all about. And
that's exactly what I need. Thank you. That's good. All those brains.
The other thing that I would mention is something that I used to do in graduate school all the time. So I think people know that I went to grad school for counseling psychology. And one of our grad advisors used to say to us all the time that you don't get to the real answer until you've asked why 5 times. So
it's the same thing.
Yeah. So the example is, why didn't you get your homework done, little Johnny? I didn't get my homework done because I stayed up too late. Why did you stay up too late? Well, I was watching my brothers and sisters. Well, why were you watching your brothers and sisters? Well, my mom took a job at night. Well, why did your mom take a job at night? Well, my dad left, and so now we're on our own. So like the more questions that you're getting why, that you're digging down to what's really going on. And I think for many of us, and I'm including myself in this, I know the shallow why at the start of the book. And I sometimes, you know, similar to what Bonnie's doing, is like I have to write my way in to figure out what those kind of multiple levels are. But I think you can be asking yourself that question sometimes ahead of time as well, around what might really be going on. And again, I tend to think from that kind of counseling perspective. And I always remember, you know, my graduate advisors telling us, nobody makes a bad decision thinking it's a bad decision, which is not the same as no one makes a bad decision. Those are two separate things. So we would often see people who have gotten themselves in horrible situations, but there was something that they were telling themselves at that moment that made that an okay thing to do. Whether that's, and if you've ever done this, I don't know if you've ever been a teenager who did something stupid, or perhaps I was the only one, but did anyone ever steal lipstick or something from the Five and Dime or whatever? Apparently only me. Okay, so
much worse.
Yeah,
much worse.
One of the things I'm not really proud of, you know, like, and if you had said to me, am I a thief? I would have said absolutely not. Like, and my parents would probably have been horrified with all of that, right? But if you kind of dug into like, what was that about? It was about obviously showing off for friends. It was about feeling that I needed to prove something. Like there are different levels to what was going on in that moment that led to that decision in that moment, which was not a good decision. And so I tend to take that approach when I'm thinking about characters, is remembering that even if they're the quote unquote bad guy, there's a reason that they're behaving in the way that they do. Like, unless you're writing someone, and to be honest, they're not very interesting characters, unless you're writing someone who's a total sociopath and just has zero emotional stake in the game, there's some reason they are doing what they're doing. There's something that is driving them, and they are probably not necessarily aware of it. That, I think, is probably what you're butting up against, Leslie, is that most of us don't have that level of insight. So we don't say, I actually go above and beyond for people and put myself last because I don't think I'm worth putting myself first. We tell ourselves, no, it's because my mom was a giver. I got it from her. Like, we have a narrative that we say, this is why I do that thing, rather than sometimes having the insight, which is, you know, as you get older, hopefully the more insight you have about why you do those things, but we're figuring that out. So I think asking why 5 times is useful.
And so it does make sense then that as you're exploring those characters and you're getting to know them and you're asking those whys, you start to figure it out, and then you can go back in and thread it through. That is, I feel like a failure. I'm like, shouldn't I know this right away? But I don't.
I mean, I think there are some writers who do, but I think, to be honest, those are often people who are doing a significant amount of planning prior to writing.
Planning, right.
Right. And again, for some people, you know, and as Lisa mentioned, for her, that kills a book, right? But, you know, for some people, that they're doing all of that and they're sorting that all out. But for many of us, even if you are a plotter, like, I know the reason. I know that they want to catch the killer. I know that they want to catch the killer because of this one thing. But it's only as I'm writing that I kind of understand the levels underneath that, and then I have to go back and put those in. So that's why that happens to me. But I do think, even if you're not going to have it figured out ahead of time, reminding yourself that there's probably something that the character is not yet aware of that is driving their behavior, or there's something that they're not yet willing to admit to themselves. We don't always like our own motivation. Yeah.
I don't know if your experiences this with counseling clients, but very often you know a thing that you can't think out loud, if you know what I mean. Like it's in there swimming around in the dark recesses of your mind. And then when the point in your life arrives that you have to confront it, you realize you've had that thought swimming around in there for years and just couldn't face it. You couldn't deal with it. And it's not like a new thing. It's like, oh, I didn't know that about myself. Yeah, you knew, right? You just couldn't handle it. So, I mean, as I've gotten older, I've realized that many times there are things that suddenly come to the surface that I realize I've been quite intentionally pushing aside for decades sometimes.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's what personal growth is. That's what everybody is trying. You know, if you remember the old Maslow's hierarchy of need, where we're working our way up to self-actualization, that is the idea that, you know, as we go through life, as we, you know, start to have a better understanding of ourselves, we know why we do things and we understand our own weaknesses, and that drives us to make certain choices that we're sometimes not very proud of. But we get something from it. Everyone makes a decision for a reason.
I just want to say right now that as I'm listening to you guys processing this, I just had a little epiphany.
Oh.
Yay!
Like now I think I have a better understanding of why he's doing all the stuff that he's doing. And he's like,
oh, I thought it was an epiphany for your own life. I thought you were like, I suddenly figured my shit out.
I'm a writer.
Yeah.
No, that's great. I'm just like, wow, I think I have it. Thank you. Yay! You changed my life again.
Then that is a good place to end for the day. So I will take that for the win. So this was your prepping for nano idea. Tonight we are going to be tackling agents, because there were some things that came up on the Ring GLIP community. We were talking about, you know, feedback you might get from an agent and kind of how to process some of that. So I think that would be sort of useful stuff to talk about this evening. But I'm thinking next week, because I know a lot of people are preparing for conferences, it might be interesting to do some pitching. And I'm curious if people would be willing to pitch.
Yeah, that would be fun.
All right. So start thinking about that for next Tuesday. We're going to do some pitching, people. And that will prepare us, pitching people preparing for the conference.
That requires putting my ideas into a tidy package.
Yes. It means getting your shit together, Marianne. Yes, it does.
You know that thing I was editing? I reworked it based on our conversations.
Yeah.
It's so long. Now I don't know what to do. I had to make a little just a little handout thing.
Yeah.
And I had to fit my blurb in this space. You can't see it because it's white. And it's not even half of what I wrote. So now I'm like, oh, which bits do I put here and which bits do I leave out? Anyway, I need more help.
We can help you. We have all the helps. All right. So people who are thinking about it, start preparing a pitch, because it's a great practice. And if you want to do two, like if you want to have two different versions, then we'll also get people to weigh in about which version they prefer. So I think that can be really useful sometimes. And we will have those things. And actually the blue pencil, red pencil, it's pretty good right now, actually. So it's a good time to submit if you're thinking about doing it for the three of us. That was a question in the chat window there. All right. Well, I hope to see some of you this evening. And until then, happy writing. And I will talk with you soon. Take care, everybody.
Have a good day.